That is the name of this evening's Instagram Live, where I'll be speaking with Dr. Shannon Chavez, who is a prominent, well-renowned and accomplished sex educator, sex therapist, sexologist, amongst other things. She's based in the US, in California. She has her own private practice where she's trained as a licensed psychologist and a certified sex therapist. I'm looking forward to speaking to Dr. Shannon Chavez. So again, just for the benefit of those of you who are joining, this evening's Instagram Live will be with Dr. Shannon Chavez Qureshi, who is a licensed psychologist and a certified sex therapist. She's from California in the United States of America. I'm just waiting for Dr. Shannon to join us. And the main topic for today's Instagram Live will be love addiction, whether it exists or not, and helping people, especially helping women, overcome love addiction. And I also would like to speak to Dr. Shannon about her career and some of the work that she does, especially in relation to Muslim women, helping them understand the pleasure and deal with some sexual health problems and concerns that they may be going through. So again, just for the benefit of those of you who are joining, today's Instagram Live is going to be about love addiction with world-renowned sex therapist, Dr. Shannon Chavez, who is from the United States of America. She's also a licensed psychologist. She has a doctorate in psychology. She has a master's in psychology. She is a certified clinical sexologist. Just reading her education and training, very accomplished and years of experience. And like I said, a lot of training behind her. And I'm looking forward to speaking to Dr. Shannon. I think she's here, so I'm just going to invite her. Hopefully I don't get this wrong. So again, just for the benefit of those of you who are joining, today's Instagram Live is going to be with Dr. Shannon Chavez, who is a prominent and accomplished sex expert from America. Okay, how do I add someone? So I can see Dr. Shannon, I just need to, there she is. Benefit of those of you who are joining, today's Instagram Live is going to be with Dr. Shannon Chavez, who fantastic.
So nice to see you.
Hello, Shannon. How are you?
I'm doing amazing.
Likewise. How are you?
I'm so excited and nervous to be talking to you. Good nervous, though. Very excited. I mean, your work was a huge influence in my work. So I just want to say thank you, and I'm very grateful to be here.
No, the pleasure's all mine, and I appreciate the work that you do. I've been watching you and following you from afar for the last few years. And yeah, just want to first obviously commend you and congratulate you for your work that you're doing. I just want to obviously help people to share the little that I know and help connect people that may be following me to kind of understand and appreciate the great work that you're doing. So
thank you. And
definitely kudos and hats off to you.
I have to say, this was the one that started it all. So I recommend this book often, and just what you compiled, what the work that you do as a scholar and writer, it's amazing. I mean, I had a lot of trouble finding these resources. Actually, a lot of the ones you quoted in your book, I was saying, this is it. There's got to be more. There has to be something else out here that has a different perspective on sexuality. So I'm glad that you kind of gave us those resources.
No, thank you very much. And again, I'm glad that there's people like you who are actually bringing the work that I'm doing and other people's work to life, because it's all well and good writing things and researching it, but it's important that there's people in the field, people like yourself, who are not only, I was just going through your website and I'm just going through your education and training, and I think you're probably the most accomplished person I've come across, because it's just mind-blowing the amount of qualifications that you've managed to obtain. So again, I think that's even that in and of itself is definitely inspiring, and it shows that we definitely do have many people, both within the Muslim community and obviously women at large, that are kind of doing great things. So definitely, again, like I said, I mean, it's not for me to say, but yeah, definitely keep it up. And I'm just really pleased to kind of be speaking with you. And again, I want to hear a little bit more about your career. So before we start, do you mind giving a quick elevator pitch introduction to who you are and the work that you do?
Therapist. I mentioned both in my title because they're different. Psychology as a researcher, I do testing, I do things that really help people understand their mind, their behavior, their backgrounds, their early experiences. A lot of my work as a psychologist focuses on attachment theory, which really helped shape my research around love addiction, which I'm excited to talk about because people always have questions about it. And then sex therapy is also a different kind of branch of psychotherapy. It's education, it's coaching, it's holding space for people around how to understand their sexuality, and then using what I know as a psychologist to help create a therapeutic space for people to heal from sexual issues. Because my theory is we all have sexual issues. So in my opinion, everyone needs a little bit of sex therapy. So I love being able to do both in my work. I have a private practice, so I offer coaching, therapy groups. I was actually just talking to one of my associates. We're planning on doing retreats and bigger kind of outreaches to get people different opportunities for healing. You know, not everyone is going to go to therapy. Not everyone has the resources in their communities to do therapy or couples work. So I want to have different opportunities to reach people. And I love that we have technology like we're doing now, so you can talk to people all over the world. And that has been an advantage I've had in my work by doing media and talking to people like yourself and getting my research out there, is that I'm able to meet people from all walks of life around the world who say, I don't have anything in my community, or my doctors are not talking about this, or how do I heal when I don't have, I don't know where to start. I mean, that's probably the thing I hear the most from people. Where do I start? What do I do? I really need some guidance in that process. So that's a lot of my work too. I consult, I work with companies around sexual wellness. Any way I can talk about sexuality and get it out there, a different message, a sex positive message. That's really what I think I'm here to do.
Wow, phenomenal. And what inspired you? Why did you decide to pursue a career in
I can't
first
remember a
psychology
time
and
I
then go
wasn't
into sex
curious about
therapy?
sex. I was definitely that child who was curious, asking the inappropriate questions, making my parents blush. And also, you know, as you know, I grew up in a very conservative environment where sex wasn't talked about, but I was fascinated by sex. I was fascinated by this thing that obviously everyone knew about, you weren't supposed to talk about, but obviously, you know, we all have in common. Sexuality is really the one universal thing we all have in common. So I wanted to understand it more. You know, why is this something that makes people feel embarrassed or shamed? And I was always comfortable talking about it and wanted to know more about it. And then when I actually started training in the field, I realized there were so many people that wanted nothing to do with sexuality, including my field of therapy and psychotherapy. People didn't want to do it, or it was too intimidating. So I felt that there was a real void in the field around positivity and sexuality, good sex education. You know, I definitely didn't get a great sex education myself. So kind of learned that, you know, this is really what I want people to have, a good basis of education and a space where they can come and feel safe to ask the questions that they don't want to ask anywhere else. So I'm still fascinated with sexuality. Still to this day, with all this training, I'm still learning about sexuality every single day. And I love that you can have a career and a focus where that's a possibility. I mean, I tell people all the time, sexuality isn't always about pleasure. We're also dealing with the shadow and darker sides of sexuality, the pain, the dysfunction. So I, wanted it to be sort of this really broad area of my own understanding. And I think as a sexuality professional, you go through your own journey in evolving and understanding, what are my values? How do I view pleasure? How can I help people in their own unique subjective view of this, but then also, do my own work in healing?
I mean, one thing that definitely does come across, not only in today's discussion, but also I've seen so many of your videos online, is your natural passion and enthusiasm towards the subject, also to tell people. And I think that resonates, and I'm sure that's one of the reasons why you're as successful as you are, and so many people want to work with you and hear from you, because I think it's one thing being interested and curious about a subject, but it's another thing where people can relate to that person. I feel that that person is genuine. I definitely do feel that from listening to you, and obviously not only reading your works, but obviously, like I said, listening to your interviews. So yeah, again, it does very come across as very genuine, and I think especially for people who maybe come from more conservative cultures or religious backgrounds, I think obviously the topic can be quite intimidating. So having someone who is not only like a friendly face, but also like a helpful voice, I think that probably does definitely help to, like you said, about creating that safe space. So, but in dealing with you know, clients, or especially with women, your female clients from religious backgrounds or more conservative cultures, what are some of the common sex myths, shall we say, especially in relation to women,
There's
that you come
definitely
across
a
that you're
lot of
trying
myths
to debunk?
around kind of your control over your pleasure, you know, permission to have pleasure. I think women, especially from conservative backgrounds, have heard a lot of mixed messaging around sort of the secondary nature of their sexual pleasure, you know, that it's really about pleasing others, or that that pleasure is really about a different experience or a different role in your identity, whether it's, you know, we're creating a family, or, you know, it hasn't really been pleasure focused. There hasn't been a lot of permission around knowing your body, having a good relationship with your body, even touching or looking at your body. So I feel like because of those mixed messages, whether it's if I do that, I'm going to be perceived in a negative way, or I won't be able to have control over that experience. I find that there's just a lot of myths around what's normal, what's right, what's okay, and am I okay because I have these thoughts or these feelings or these fantasies around sex. So that's a common issue I see. A lot of shame, a lot of embarrassment, a lot of fear around sex, and not a great relationship with pleasure as a whole. And that's really a focus in my practices. Absolutely, we're looking at sexuality, but just your relationship to pleasure. Humans are natural pleasure seekers. So when I meet with a client from a conservative background, I want to know about their sex history or their sexual conditioning, but I also want to know, what is their relationship with pleasure? What makes them feel good? That is really what drives us and motivates us on so many levels in our life, biologically, psychologically, is our seeking to feel good. We want to have experiences to feel good. And so I find that that is a major conflict that women come in with. Sex doesn't feel good. It may hurt. It may feel shameful. I don't know how to communicate what I like or want. I don't feel comfortable in my body. So these are very common issues I see with women of all ages and stages of life. So there are just a lot of similarities, even outside of conservative communities. I think we all share similar experiences, which is why I like working with conservative populations, because they can sometimes feel very isolated and different from other cultures, but yet very similar issues, very similar concerns.
Right, right, amazing, amazing. And again, can you? I was just looking on your website, and I
Yes.
came across your, I think it's a mind body approach to is it sexual pleasure enhancement. Can you talk a little bit about that
Yes,
and
when I was doing my
what
training,
that's
I
all
found that
about?
there was kind of something missing in psychotherapy in terms of how we were dealing with sexual concerns. I thought that we kind of hit you know, an end of the road when you're doing the processing or talking through or working with belief systems. It was the relationship with the body that was missing. So I created kind of a model to look at how all of these factors play in together. So mind body approach means we're looking at how what we learn and what we think about sex does affect our body, our physiological response, our nervous system, and helping people understand the somatic role of sex. Because what's more body-based than sex? I mean, sex is very much about our mind, body, heart, and spirit experience. So I wanted people to understand that, you know, sex isn't just this thing we do. It's an experience we create. It's an energy release. It's connection. And so by having this model, I think it helps people expand their own definition of sex. And to say, oh, okay, so enjoying aesthetic beauty with a partner can be pleasure, or, you know, erotic is much more than just what we're doing mechanically with our bodies. So this approach has helped me assess differently when it comes to gathering information from clients about sexuality, and then also creating a treatment model that isn't just talk therapy and kind of processing what has gone on and looking at it more in terms of a behavioral model, but more of a whole, holistic, as in whole body, whole person model around sexuality. And it's empowering. I find that mind-body approach gives you a lot more tools, a lot more awareness around how sexuality works, rather than just having constructs or schemas of, okay, this is what sex or love should look like. So I love the mind-body approach. I love the movement that I think our culture is in right now around wanting more wellness and mindfulness and ways to connect on a deeper level to our bodies and minds. So it just fits in perfectly with sexuality. I can't think of a better fit than mindfulness, mind-body work, and sexuality.
Lovely, lovely. And again, just a final question before we get into that, the topic at hand. So you're a certified clinical sexologist, a professional sex coach, and also a certified sex therapist. What is the difference between the three, a
Yes, great
therapist, a
question.
coach, and a
And it's a
sexologist?
lot of different training, but they all really have a different approach. So sexology really comes from the scientific background of why we do things sexually and how. So looking at behaviors and the understanding of our sexual behavior. So I use a lot of my sexological training for education to help people have good resources and tools. So there's a lot of education I use with sexological approaches, from everything from how to assess, with how to help clients understand, self-examination of their bodies and understanding physiological and biological things that we do sexually that are really our kind of primal instincts. And then sex coaching kind of works with that and offers a more solution-focused approach to working with sexual concerns. Because many clients come in, they're very high functioning, they may not have mental health issues, and they're just really looking for tips and tools. I want some books to read, or I want to know about products, or I'm curious about vibrators, but I'm not really sure. Where do I start? So I find sex coaching to be a great alternative to therapy, because we really start with the current. What's going on now? What can we do to provide some good resources and get you excited about sex? That could be going on a field trip to a store where you're buying some products, or actually doing demonstrations. What I love about sex coaching is I have a lot of tools. I have devices I'll bring out. I have vulva puppets and things that I'll use to help people understand concepts in sexuality. And then therapy is the type of approach where we're doing talk therapy, we're processing, but we're really looking at all aspects of that person, their identity, their values, their culture, their early life. And this is where my psychodynamic work comes in. I want to know about early relationships, traumas, things that have gone on that really shaped who that person is sexually. And it helps me understand a bit more about their ways of thinking and things that actually maybe where they're stuck in their life. So very different. I always tell people not everyone needs therapy when it comes to sexual issues. And that's why, assessing and really looking at what the concern is and giving someone a space to be able to address some of these issues may, determine which one of those approaches or modalities works best. And to be honest, I kind of use a combination of those when I work with clients. We'll do a little bit of therapy and coaching, and in most of my cases, working with sexual issues.
Fantastic, fantastic. Again, just for the benefit for people who are joining, because I've seen a few people join in the last few minutes, I'm speaking to Dr. Shannon Chavez, who is a licensed psychologist, a certified sex therapist. To be honest, she's a master sex expert, I would say, because she's a sex coach, she's a sexologist. Her training and education is phenomenal. She's a fountain of knowledge with a wealth of experience. I'm just blown away by what she's saying, and I'm trying to write notes, but I just have to remember I'm going to record this, so I'm going to have to listen to some of this again. But the topic at hand, we had a bit of a preamble in terms of listening a little bit about Dr. Shannon's background, but I'd like to now go into the topic of love addiction. Before we get into the topic itself, do you mind defining what is love addiction and whether it
love
exists?
Addiction, it's not actually an addiction. I mean, addiction can be very subjective as to how you define it. I mean, if we're looking at it in terms of a chemical addiction, it is definitely not that. But that was my question going into this research. What is it? who gets it? Can we really be addicted to love? And so my definition is that love addiction is a unconscious habit that forms as a way to meet an unfulfilled need. And usually that stems from early attachment wounding. So that can be, I'm using sex or relationships, and love addiction, by the way, can be 3 different subcategories. You can have sexual out of control compulsive behaviors, relationship dependency, or actually feel a sort of drive towards love, the experience of love, passion, romance, sort of the fantasy of that can become the compulsion in the relationship. So I saw it as more of this unconscious drive. And I also saw a major component in early attachment and working models of sex and love that leads to maybe, distortions in how people are seeing that in their own modeling of relationships. So for example, if you had a model of love always being something that was risky or, dangerous or difficult to obtain, that's a working model that you may bring into relationships. Maybe it creates avoidant attachment or difficulty opening up because it's too vulnerable and overwhelming. So I really found love addiction to be something that, yes, it can exist, but I don't use the word addiction. I look at it as more of maybe an out of control or a behavior that has now become something that isn't providing you with comfort, but instead activating a lot of distress. I think people think of sex and love addiction as something that, people are getting a lot of this euphoria or feeling of intensity, and that it's something pleasurable. But for many people that experience this, it's actually a very cyclic experience, a very short-lived pleasure that then activates a lot of shame, a lot of guilt, a lot of isolation, a lot of depression and anxiety. So I was fascinated by it. I was working in an industry, kind of the mid-late 2000s, where it was all over the place. I mean, you couldn't read a newspaper without reading about sex addiction. And in working with clients and couples, I found that they were saying most men are sex addicts, but women are love addicts. And I thought, why is that? Why are women looked at as love addicts? Can women be sex addicts as well? I mean, what is all of this? And so I started diving into books like Women Who Love Too Much and Leaving the Enchanted Forest, and all of these sort of ideas of how we see love addiction as something that can be very socially constructed. And that was a lot of the work I was doing as I provided my research, is that, yes, of course we can become consumed by love. Anything we do in our life can claim our consciousness, and love is powerful. I mean, if we think about it, it's our first emotion. It's universal. I mean, everyone knows love. Even animals experience love. So it's a powerful, powerful emotion. But if you ask maybe a group of 100 people, I imagine everyone would have a different definition of what love actually is. And I saw that even in my field of psychology. I mean, there are so many variations of how people define love, how we measure love, what are healthy sort of models of love. So it was all over the place. So when I was doing my research around love addiction, I found that there really is a lot of work to be done in understanding, love and love behavior, but fascinating in terms of how we understand our own behavior, and also the relationship and sexuality in love. I mean, that kind of gets crossed in our learning around what is, what do we really value, and how do we experience connection? Is love necessary for us to have sex, or is sex necessary for us to have love? So there's just sort of a lot of, again, mixed messaging and social conditioning around how we view love.
And in your field with experts like yourself, is there more of an acceptance or pushback with like the love addiction term compared to the sex addiction term? Because I understand that the sex addiction hasn't been admitted into the DSM as of yet. It's sexual compulsive behavior. I'm just wondering, what's the stance towards like
it's
love
the same
addiction
sort of divide. I would say there's
experts?
sort of a side of the field that says absolutely, here's sort of the way we view it and models in which support it. as sort of a compulsive addictive behavior. And then the other side says absolutely not. I would say sort of that middle ground and understanding in terms of how clinicians view it is that it can be an out of control behavior, but we treat it more as something that is not as negatively viewed or perceived as something, you know, completely out of your control. I think the out of control sex and love model looks at it more as understanding it as sort of something that underlies, is driven by anxiety or early traumas, and has a bit more of a healthy sexuality model attached to that treatment. That was something I was seeing lacking in particularly the sex addiction model. There was a lot of, you know, adaptation to the sort of addiction, chemical addiction model of, you know, doing 12-step programs and sort of admitting this powerlessness over, you know, love and sex. And even though I see some value in that model, it was really missing the piece of healthy sexuality. You know, if we're abstaining from all things sexuality, how do we integrate that back into our life in a healthy way? So that was what really prompted my research. Does it exist? How do we work with it? And how can we give clinicians a better tool or resource on how to work with clients rather than just kind of abstaining from everything and creating more shame, which perpetuated the cycle in the first place, and giving them an understanding and accountability for their sexual and, you know, love behaviors that may just not be working for them. So language is really important, and also, you know, that providing that healthy sexuality model were really important in terms of how I work with sex and love addiction, as I put them in quotes, because whatever we call it, you know, I'm less concerned about what we call it and more about the experience that the individual has. And I find that most clients self-identify because they've read that and they've maybe taken an assessment online, 10 questions that says, yes, 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 okay, I must be a sex or love addict. And so there's so much confusion again around, you know, identifying as this thing that I have that makes me again feel powerless and broken, and that something's wrong with me, that if anything, I believe just creates a secondary trauma if we don't treat it properly.
Yeah. Yeah. Another term that I've heard being thrown around, which is similar to, or I'm not sure how similar it is to love addiction, codependency. Is that the same as love addiction?
They
or
are very similar. It's interesting because there was a book that came out in 1975. It was the first book that actually talked about love and addiction. It was written by Stanton Peele, and he was the first one who said, yes, absolutely, love can be something that we can create, you know, again, more of an addiction in terms of something that claims our consciousness that then becomes out of our control. So he also didn't adapt it to what later became Patrick Carnes' model in the early 80s around sex addiction. He had a different way of viewing it. And so in his work, he did sort of say, because they're different in the sense of what they form or how they form and what kind of leads to love addiction. But what he said in terms of codependency, which I always sort of adapt in my work, is codependency is more of a learned model. So love addiction may be more of the early attachment programming that forms, and then codependency is what may be modeled or what we see or observe in our environment, that when we also adapt similarly as a working model in terms of how relationships function. So I see that more as sort of part of our family systems, that we may see codependency form in that way. But the similarity is that there can be a seeking or a, you know, behaviors that form as a way to get needs met. And maybe in codependency, less about meeting your own needs, but finding that satisfaction or the filling of the void from meeting someone else's needs. But very similar. I see a lot of those dynamics come up in individuals or even couples that are dealing with some of these compulsive love or sexual behaviors.
Right. And from your experience, do you see more men or women identifying as love addicts?
I would say more females.
50,
I see primarily more females identifying with that. And again, I saw that split quite a bit when I first became interested in this topic. But if we look at it in terms of just early attachment, issues that come up, you would say that many, again, many men as well are dealing with the same dynamics that come up in relationships, whether it's avoidant attachment styles that lead to just behaviors in relationships that aren't serving them, difficulty opening up with vulnerability, overwhelmed with intimacy. So it definitely can happen to anyone at any stage and any age, but definitely something more that I believe females identify with. And that was kind of my problem with how our culture was looking at it, and sort of saying, all right, women are sort of the milder version over here of love addiction, but men are over here dealing with sex addiction. I just think there's a lot of misconception and misunderstanding. But if you educate clients around what it really is, I find that more, again, males, females, many different diverse backgrounds will say, yes, that explains my experience.
Mm-hmm. Lovely, lovely. And I loved what you said about helping the clients understand whatever they're going through. So it's not necessarily the labels, it's what the experience is. So, and I'm just using love addiction just because that's something that a lot of people seem to kind of understand, even though it might mean different things to different people, like the concept of love, like I mentioned earlier. But I was just wondering, like, in terms of this split, because oftentimes when I hear people talking about addiction, like sex-related addiction, whether it's sex or porn, they'll generally associate with men. Whereas if it's relationship or love, then they may associate with women. I was just wondering why that was, but I think I think you've definitely explained that. And another thing is, what was that word? Is it limerence and infatuation? Is that, or like being lovesick, or like the Hollywood concept of falling in love? Is that also a form of like love addiction, or is
limerence is a natural stage of love, but we can kind of get stuck there. There can be kind of a stuckness in that place, or a comfort in that phase of love, because if we think about it, limerence is really supposed to guide us into more healthy attachment, secure attachment, and what we would call more of our companionate love, where we develop deeper levels of intimacy. Now, if someone has love addiction and they, that's overwhelming for them, they may feel more comfort in the limerence phase. It may give them more of that, mood altering experience of, I feel good, I get the dopamine rush, I feel a confidence, a sense of worth. But when I move into that stage of that companionate stage, where relationships naturally evolve, it becomes overwhelming, and they may sabotage the relationship. They may, walk away from the relationship because they don't really have the tools to know how to navigate that. So I think that education becomes really healthy there. And that's what my model in my research was, an attachment-oriented psychodynamic model. How do we work with creating healthy attachment in therapy so that we can help individuals feel that sense of security and independence, so they feel confident enough to seek out and experience intimacy in the way in which they can get their needs met, they can communicate, and they don't have to use sex and love behaviors to feel fulfilled, and they're able to ask for their needs and create a partnership that works for them. So that's important.
And if anyone is seeking therapy, like for example, they're looking to seek someone like yourselves services, does it have to be face-to-face, or can it be online?
Actually, a lot of my coaching is international, so it's all done through video platforms or phone, or even Zoom, through groups. I love doing groups with people that can kind of join and open up and share. I find that there's a lot of healing in group work, especially around these issues where many people have suffered in silence for a long time. They feel like they're the only one, or they've even been to therapy and felt even more, again, dysfunctional. Something's wrong with me, created a lot of shame. So what's been really nice is to create groups and retreats and workshops and places where people can say, oh, I'm not the only one. Her story is my story, or their story is what I've been dealing with in my relationship. So yes, video has been a wonderful resource to reach people, because as I mentioned earlier, a lot of people don't have services in their area. They don't have specialists, they don't have places to go. So I love that technology allows us to connect and offer my expertise to others out there. So I really do enjoy that. And it gives me a different perspective too on different cultural issues. I'm talking a lot about American culture and these influences, the media, mixed messages. So every culture and place in this world has their own sort of social issues around sexuality or political issues around sexuality. So I like that I have this opportunity to connect with people and, offer a different perspective, help them heal, no matter where they are in the world.
Yeah. And a question that, I've received this a couple of times, but a lot of the questions, a lot of the questions that I got, whether it's sex related or love addiction related questions, it often ends with the person asking, is this normal? Am I okay? And I'm assuming most of the questioners are from women. From your experience, why is this seems to be like a common question around is it am I normal, or is this wrong, or am I wrong? I'm just trying to understand again from your experience.
Oh, yes.
Does this often come up? Do you hear this a lot?
Men, women, couples, individuals, it's a very, very common question. And I would say the first reason why we feel that is that the medical model really tries to normalize sexuality in a lot of ways, whether it's measuring ways in which our body should function or quantifying sexuality. So people learn that model first. The clinical model is usually the first model that people have had, whether it's going to a gynecologist or learning about sexuality in a more clinical environment. Even sex ed, what do we learn in sex ed? Reproductive function, physiological function. We don't learn about any other aspect of sexuality, which is intimacy, communication, how to socially connect in our sexuality, not just the mechanics of it, but the expression of it. Sexuality to me is our personalities, our the way we dress, what we do, how we, what we believe. So there's so much more than just that. So I think that question, am I normal, comes from comparing yourself to what we have been taught are normal types or models of sexuality. That word healthy, I don't use that a lot because what does that really mean? I think that even that creates this, am I normal or not? If that's healthy and I'm here, I'm definitely not that. So I must be broken, abnormal, even the word dysfunction, not crazy about it. To me, it's very much, again, medical model, and it implies that there's something broken. I don't believe that anything in our sexuality is broken. I think that we have concerns that create a lot of problems in how our mind and body functions around sex. So that's important. Language is really important. I think that creates such an ease, especially when people come in and that's the first question they ask. Am I normal? Am I the only one who's going through this? It's the first part of healing and sex therapy is, yes, not only are you normal, but this happens to everyone. And occasionally I'll disclose, I'll be like, as a female speaking to a female, I've gone through this. We will go through this. This is part of our natural lifespan as a sexual being. So that is such a helpful thing for people to hear. And that's why I love bigger groups, because people can say, not only am I not abnormal, but I'm in a space with community where we're all going through this. It's so bonding, and it really helps people heal in a deeper way. There's sort of a sisterhood or brotherhood of bonding that happens, and that's really missing with sexuality. We have communities for everything, but sexual communities are sort of looked at as diverse, but there's not many communities that we can go into and really talk about our sexuality. I'm always amazed when I ask women who feel that they're not normal, or men, do you talk to your friends about this? Have you ever shared any of your sexual concerns with anyone? No, I would never. Do you ever talk about things that are going well, or your sexual, adventures that have led to joy or feeling confident? No, I don't talk about that either. So I'm always surprised to see we don't talk about our pain. We don't talk about our pleasure. We just don't talk about it at all. And that, is such a part of this whole problem. I think if we talked about it, which I recommend to my clients, let's just not talk about it when there's a problem after we're, in the bedroom in the moment. Let's talk about sex over a nice breakfast, on a walk with a partner, while we're out with our friends, while we're gathering and relaxing. It should be a part of our natural dialogue, because it's a big part of our life. Whether we're having sex or not, it's a big part of who we are, and our, that's how we all got here. And that's really what we're here to do, is experience connection in many different ways.
Amazing, amazing. Again, just for the benefit for people who are joining, I am speaking to Dr. Shannon Chavez, who is a well-renowned, prominent, accomplished, licensed psychologist and certified sex therapist, sex coach, sex educator, master sex expert, amongst other things. And we're speaking about love addiction, speaking a little bit about her career and her passion for helping women understand pleasure and sex and sexuality, amongst other things. I've got a question. I did post, like on my stories, I was asking people to ask me some questions for you. One question which someone asked was, how do I tell my man without hurting his ego that he is, sorry, how do I tell my man without hurting his ego that he's no good in bed? He won't
Yes.
talk about sex.
Well, think about that. If you're giving feedback, which is something that a lot of people have problems with sex because they're afraid of the response. But feedback is important for everything we do. Think about anything we do, work, parenting, all of these responsibilities we have in life. We never really knew how we were doing. We wouldn't be able to figure out how to better meet our needs or have a better experience. So I think with feedback, you want to think about, again, the language you're using, the intention behind it. Sometimes we give feedback for our own satisfaction because I need to get it out there. I need to communicate what's going on. But we don't always think about the dynamic. You know, if we're sharing something, what reaction do we want? Do we want to motivate our partner? If so, we probably don't want to berate them with all the negative things or things they're doing wrong. We might want to balance that out a bit with what's going well, what do we appreciate, what are things that are actually working really well that we want to enhance or keep within our dynamic. And so I kind of recommend creating a bit of, you know, slowing that down and having it be a process where you take your time having that conversation. And let's say our partner is resistant. All right, you're sharing what you're sharing, but I don't have any feedback. I don't have anything to say. That may be your intention, right? I don't need your response in this moment, but it would be nice to be heard and to be understood. So can you hold that space for me? Can you allow me to share my feelings? And if you're worried about your partner's ego, you may be making it more about your partner than you are about your actual experience. So for example, let's say you're not getting the type of sex that you want and your feedback is all about what you need to do more of or what you're not doing enough of. And maybe you can talk more about that personal experience. You know, when I don't feel like I'm getting my needs met sexually, I turn myself off or I avoid sex or I feel irritable in certain areas of our intimacy. So you're able to disclose a bit more about your personal experience, which helps create that vulnerability, which may actually give a partner permission to say, okay, well, that makes sense. It may actually create an opportunity for empathy more rather than reacting to each other. What we don't want to do is be two lawyers creating a case where here's all the facts and here's the facts and we're just going back and forth. Who has the stronger case of why things need to change? That's really not how we motivate ourselves or each other around change. So I think, you know, feedback is extremely important, and maybe starting with the practice of feedback before you go into the most difficult topics around what you want to address around sexuality is think about just starting to give feedback as a practice, as a habit within the relationship. So then when you get into sexual topics, there's more of an ease and a flow in that communication rather than both of you being tense and maybe walled up around actually addressing those issues.
Lovely. There was a question that someone asked. It's quite an interesting one. How does curving the language around actual sexual dysfunction truly address people's genuine concern
yes,
that
great
something
question. You know, I think
wrong?
language, if anything, the power of language is that it can normalize and stigmatize, but not always in a good way. So if we're using terms like dysfunction and using a very medical model to work with sexual issues, let's say that treatment doesn't work. And now you're thinking, all right, I had this issue. This was the way that I was taught or that I learned to address it. And now it's not working for me. It really doesn't move you anywhere closer to where you want to be around feeling more sexually empowered or in control. So language is important. And it's also important to remember that sexuality is subjective. So what I try to do is not kind of bring in all of these clinical terms and phrases and overwhelm, because let's face it, they're not the most friendly words in our sexuality. I mean, for example, hypoactive sexual desire disorder. What sounds scarier than that to describe something that I imagine almost every human being has dealt with at some point in their life? So that's an example. You know, is it important to use that term to help someone understand that they have low desire? To me, not necessarily. I may kind of give information and share how we look at that clinically, but I also kind of broaden that to normalize that, yes, low sexual desire is a part of sexuality, even healthy sexuality, you know, healthy in whatever way you view that. So what I try to do is build the rapport and understand your language. How do you view sex? What do you call your genitals? How do you refer to your low desire? Do you actually say that? I have low sexual desire. I mean, some people say low libido. What does that really mean? We hear libido, desire. What's the difference? I mean, there's so much mixed language. And sometimes I'll meet someone and they'll have read so much and there's all this language and I'll say, what does that mean to you? Is that how you feel? And they'll say, no, that's what I thought this is. And so it feels even more isolating. So I'll use the client's language. I'll be curious about that. Even in my assessments, I have a lot of space where a new client can fill in their own information. I like to hear their story in their words. What do they use to refer to that? How do they refer to even their early education and history? So that's kind of my view on using the language. Now, for an individual who says this is important because that, for example, if I have vaginismus, that may be important for me to understand, there's actually a name to this. And so it helps me understand this condition I've been dealing with maybe all my sexual life. And so that gives me a sense of relief, knowing that I'm not the issue. There's something here that I'm going through that is also something that people experience. So it really varies case by case, but I think in general, I really try to open people up to expanding how they use that language so they can help, again, feel more empowered and not so broken around sexual issues, like I said, that are just so common.
That answer was brilliant. That's a brilliant answer. Very comprehensive, and I loved what you said about, and I agree wholeheartedly about language to normalize and also can stigmatize, and what you said about speaking to people, your clients, in the language that they understand, because I think there does appear to be a disconnect sometimes with whether it's academics or medical professionals or people that know they've got their own jargon, but then saying or relaying that message to the everyday person, it can seem like it's overwhelmed that they don't really understand what they're saying. So, and I do think you definitely communicate that very well, even online as well with your online presence to your social media account. And I like how you use memes as well and like entertain. So it's not just like raw hard data, and it seems and it comes across very friendly and okay, this is like a real person. I'm not just speaking to data or information or just someone who's just trying to impress me with their knowledge. So that does come across really well. Again, just for the benefit of anyone listening, go and follow and check out Dr. Shannon's Instagram page. You can obviously you can just click at the top, Dr. Shannon, and go and follow and check her out. And obviously your website is
yes,
it
Dr. Shannon Chavez.
Chavez.com, is that
There's
correct?
a lot of articles I've written or been featured in. So a lot of good information. I think that's important because there's a lot of information out there. There's a lot of people out there who may refer to themselves as experts. So we have a lot of, again, the media and internet can give us a lot of good information, but I like people to kind of have accurate information, especially as we're talking about language. I always tell this fact when I'm teaching. I also teach human sexuality to master's level psychology students. And one thing I always share with them is that there are actually over 537 different terms for genitals in our culture and world. So I always say, can you imagine any other part of the body having that many references? It's unbelievable. So having, again, calling our parts what they are, especially our sexual parts. These are not dirty words. These are, not things that we shouldn't be afraid to say. And we also shouldn't be confusing ourselves around what we're referring to. For example, I hear down there a lot, and that's a very common one. Down there, down where? Are we referring to feet? Are we referring to legs? This is what we've learned to refer to as our private area that we can't even speak the name. So I think it's you know, again, kind of fascinating, even on social media now, where there's a lot of censorship, even around using sexual language. I think I posted something about penises recently, penis diversity, that was taken down as inappropriate sexual content. So I think sex educators like myself and many of my great colleagues, and even the work that you do, I'm sure you deal with this on a daily basis too, the again, censorship of us being able to be sex educators on a social media platform.
Yeah, I've got 2 strikes to my name, and I got flagged again yesterday, but then I appealed it. Then they said it was fine. It was someone reported it, or it was flagged for hate speech. I don't know how, but I've got 2 flags to my name. So again, one more flagged, and apparently I'm even in the jailhouse. So I'm going to be deleted. So I have to be quite clever with yeah, how I start posting things. But yeah, that's one of the things, the issues of censorship, and it's quite crazy because. But I've noticed there seems to be, I don't know if you've come across this, there's more of a policing over when I post about women's issues as opposed to men. As in, there's certain words that's kind of like not acceptable. Whether you mention the vagina, clitoris, vulva, I've not really come across that, but that kind of gets flagged. Whereas like the penis is not really kind of flagged as frequently, or maybe more people are flagging when they anything that's like anything to do with women as opposed to men. So that's also,
Yes,
there seems to be like a double standard with
absolutely. I mean, I
Instagram and
posted
maybe
about,
social media
March is
stuff like this.
Endometriosis Awareness Month, and that's such a big concern that I personally go through, and it's a big passion of mine to teach people about, especially around sexuality. And that was flagged for inappropriate content because of the nature of talking about, you know, this debilitating disease that affects us. Again, a pelvic pain disease. And so, you know, even things like that, it really having to be creative as to how we educate and provide good information when there's, you know, maybe a lot of barriers to that, you know, how platforms will support you in sharing that information, and then how we can get the word out and educate when people, again, may not have the right resources and need that in their own journeys around healing.
Lovely. And again, just the final thing, because we've got about, I think, 5 or 10 minutes, because normally Instagram gives us an hour. I've been getting like an hour messages, so like it kind of shuts down. So I would like to ask you a little bit about your research, which you
Yes.
presented in 2017, Islam and Sexuality by 2 Latin American converts in the US. Can you talk a little bit about that, and what was your key findings, and what was the response from the other sex educators and sex
Yes,
therapists
my
at the
research
conference
began
as
actually when I converted myself to Islam. We had moved back to Los Angeles and was looking for a community, and found a community in South Central LA. That was my community. Shout out to Islam Academy. They are the wonderful community that was so welcoming of me. And it was interesting as a sex therapist, when I went into that community as a newly Muslim woman, I was so embarrassed to share that I was a sex therapist. I will admit that. I didn't know how the community would accept me. And what I found in this community is there was a lot of openness and curiosity and desire for education. So I started doing groups at my mosque and started doing sexual health workshops. So it really created this need and niche. And what I found that there's not, from the community and from other communities that I then reached out to, is that no one's interested or offering sex education for these women. So that's what started the research. And then I have my wonderful colleague Nia, who was part of my research, who was also working in communities as a Latin American convert. And so we joined forces and said, let's create something that we can then take and offer to different communities, and even have communities offer for their communities, and co-facilitate the space for women to learn about sex. And that's really how it began. And so we did everything from surveys just to get general information on what are the topics. Because I'll be honest, when I did my first group, it was just kind of a, let's go for it and see how it goes. We had women from 17 to 71. And the biggest feedback I got was, we probably need to separate this out into different issues for different age groups, especially conservative women, obviously, that are pre-marriage and haven't quite sort of stepped into what those sexual needs may be. So that's really what began the research. And it was so healing for me too as a convert, because I come from a Catholic background, and going into Islam and sort of understanding, how do I communicate about these topics? What is acceptable? What are the things that people learn? And again, language and all of that information, which, by the way, your book helped me a lot with interpretation of, again, what some of these texts and scholars have said over years and years, and understanding pleasure from an Islamic perspective. So that was part of why I felt it was important to do this research. So presenting it at the World Association of Sexology was wonderful. We got really great positive reception and a lot of support, and that felt great. Again, a community that not a lot of people are reaching out to, or maybe don't know how to broach the subject of sexuality, and just kind of going in there. And my model was an integrated model. So it was also about, it's not just talking about it, but really the whole mind-body approach. How can we teach women about sexuality in not only a fun way, an informative way, but from, again, mind, body, heart, and soul? How do we bring that into our understanding of sexuality and make it a little bit of fun at the same time?
Amazing. And I loved what you said. I read the abstract about of that paper where you mentioned you believe it's essential for sex therapists to understand the culture and religion of their clients and to provide them with a safe environment to explore their needs. Yeah, that's amazing. Is that something that you've come across that I'm just wondering, are many therapists taught about the importance of culture and religion of their clients in terms of having empathy and understanding how that may impact their
Not
understanding
enough.
of,
I mean,
of
it's kind of
sex
like
and
sexuality
sexuality?
education. They may get one course on, multicultural counseling and cultural issues. Not enough, because I hear so many stories of clients that may have, a therapist made a passive comment or made them feel unsafe or created a little bit of shame or challenged their beliefs, especially around sexuality. I've had many conservative clients come in and say, I wanted to cancel this appointment because I thought, if anything, you were going to make me do something I didn't want to do or change my beliefs around something. So I found it was really important to make someone feel that their beliefs were understood. And even if I don't know much about that background, to be curious about it, because religion has been such a big part of my work. My first sex addiction clinic, we had a very large Orthodox Jewish population in terms of treatment. I worked in a clinic that was primarily Mormon women and couples. And so again, it's important for us as clinicians to say, how can I work with this and understand and be curious about this culture so we can blend that into healthy sexuality in a way that makes sense for this individual without creating, again, normalizing it or imposing models that may turn people off to sexuality, but instead help them embrace it at their pace in a way that feels aligned with who they are in their cultural and spiritual beliefs. So that's really important. And I wish there were more training. I mean, I hope that even this discussion may help us to kind of think of, how do we help clinicians? I do a lot of education for clinicians around sex therapy, sexology, clinical sexology, but I really do believe that cultural and religious piece is missing from our training and field, unfortunately.
Amazing. I mean, I like to be is it optimistic or pessimistic? Optimistic. But the work that you're doing and the works of the likes of Angelica Lindsay Alish, amongst others like Shakira Abdullah, there's a number of now prominent, trained as well, Muslim women, sex educators, sex therapists, who are not only helping women, but also breaking some of the stigma and the taboos towards sex and sexuality. So again, I just want to commend you for your work and please keep going. I think we've come to the end. Do you mind letting people know where they can contact you? This is your sales pitch. Please plug in anything that you've got going, any kind of all your
Yes,
services or where people
absolutely.
can
All
find you.
social
Please
media
let people know.
platforms at Dr. Shannon Chavez, and my website, drshannonChavez.com, and my practice is shapecenter.org. So that's where you can get information about my practice and my team of clinicians and what we do and all of our expertise. So please, I also offer a complimentary phone consult. So if people are kind of curious, is coaching for me? Should I do sex therapy? We offer a phone consult to kind of direct you to what might be a good service or to help you find one in your area. I also have many colleagues and a great network. So if we can't help you, we will definitely help you find someone who can. So yes, thank you again. I mean, I'm
Amazing.
such a fan of yours,
Amazing.
and this is such an honor. And anytime you want to talk about sexuality and religion, I'm here.
Lovely, lovely. We definitely have to do this again, and probably talk
Excellent.
more offline, because I want to connect you with a couple other people that I'm sure you can mutually benefit with each other. So
Perfect.
again, Dr. Shannon, right on time, 25 seconds remaining. I want to make sure I save this, because I upload this. But again, it's been my pleasure. Thank you again for the work that you're doing. You're not only an inspiration, but you're also inspiring people. So again, thank you very much, and thanks everyone for joining. Assalamu alaikum to you all. Bye bye.